The Great Galactic Assembly met once every 10 cycles on the ring station called Varen's Crown, a massive wheel of metal and light that floated between three suns. Delegates from 400 species came here to argue, trade, and measure each other's worth. In this place, worth was not measured by kindness or wisdom. It was measured by noise. Every species that joined the assembly was given a presence score. The score was based on how loud a civilization was across the galaxy, how many ships they sent to conquer, how many broadcasts they sent bragging about their victories, how many monuments they built to their own greatness. The louder a species was, the higher their score, and the more respect they received in the halls of power. Humanity had joined the assembly only 12 years ago. In that time, humans had built exactly one embassy, sent exactly one trade fleet, and made exactly 0 speeches about their own greatness. Their presence score was the lowest of any member species in assembly history, lower than the Doff, a species of the philosophers who spent most of their time meditating, lower than the Yulin, a small trading race that mostly just wanted to be left alone. The other species had a name for humans. They called them the Quiet Ones. It was not meant as a compliment. In the central chamber of Varun's crown, a tall alien named Korash Vey stood at the podium. He was a Threxian, a species known across the galaxy for their booming voices and their long list of conquered worlds. His skin was a deep purple, and 4 eyes sat on his broad head, each one glowing faintly with a cold yellow light. He was the commander of the Threxian Third Fleet, and he had come to Varun's crown today to make a point. "Delegates," Korash said, his voice rolling through the chamber like thunder. "I have reviewed the assembly records on this species called humanity. In 12 years, they have said almost nothing. They have shown almost nothing. They sit in their small corner of the galaxy, and they do not speak, and they do not fight, and they do not boast. I ask you all, what kind of species behaves this way? A weak one, a frightened one, a species with nothing to say, because it has nothing worth saying." There was laughter in the chamber. Not everyone laughed, but many did. The Threxians had a reputation for cruelty in their humor, and today was no different. At the back of the chamber, a small human delegation sat quietly. There were only 3 of them: Ambassador Elena Cho, a woman in her 50s with gray hair pulled back in a simple knot, and 2 aides, who sat just behind her. None of them reacted to Korash's words. None of them whispered to each other. They simply watched, their faces calm, their eyes steady. A Yulin delegate sitting nearby leaned toward Elena Cho. "Are you not going to respond?" the small alien asked, its voice full of concern. "He insults your entire species in front of the whole assembly." Elena Cho smiled, just slightly. "Why would we respond?" she said quietly. "He is not wrong that we have said little. He is wrong about why." The Yulin delegate did not understand, but there was no time to ask more, because Korash Vey was still speaking. "I propose," Korash continued, "that the assembly send a formal inspection fleet to human space, not to attack, not yet, simply to inspect, to see with our own eyes whether this species is hiding something, or whether they are simply as weak and pathetic as their silence suggests. If they refuse, we will know the truth, and if a species refuses inspection by the assembly has the right to take further action." This was, of course, exactly what Korash wanted. He did not care about inspection. He cared about provocation. The Threxian Empire had grown large through a very simple method. They identified species who seemed weak. They provoked them into either surrendering or fighting back weakly, and then they took whatever they wanted. It had worked 147 times before. Korash saw no reason it would not work an 148th time. The assembly voted. Most species voted yes, either because they agreed with Korash, or because they were afraid of the Threxians, or simply because they did not want to be the ones standing against a popular idea. The vote passed with a large majority. Elena Cho did not stand to argue. She simply raised her hand when the time came for objections, and when the assembly speaker gave her the floor, she said only a few words. "Humanity does not object to inspection," she said. "You are welcome to send your fleet. We only ask that you follow standard first contact protocol and give proper notice before entering our system. We would hate for there to be any misunderstandings." Korash smiled a wide, sharp smile. Of course, Ambassador. We are not barbarians. We will give you all the notice you need. He did not mean it as a threat, not exactly. But there was something in the way he said it, something confident and mocking, as if he already knew how this would end. Many species in the chamber recognized that tone. They had seen it before, right before the Threxians moved against some smaller, weaker world. After the session ended, Elena Cho and her two aides walked quietly through the halls of Verun's crown toward their transport ship. One of the aides, a young man named David Okafor, finally spoke once they were alone. Ambassador, they are going to send warships, not inspection ships. I saw the fleet manifest that Threxian staff filed an hour ago. 12 heavy cruisers and a command carrier. That is not an inspection fleet. That is an invasion force pretending to be an inspection fleet. I know, Elena Cho said calmly. Should we not warn Earth Defense Command? Should we not prepare a response? Elena Cho stopped walking and looked at her young aide. David, Earth Defense Command has known about the Threxians for 6 years. We have been watching them since before we even joined this assembly. Do you think we came here without preparing for exactly this moment? David blinked. You knew this would happen? We suspected. The Threxians have a pattern. They always test the newest, quietest members of the assembly first. It is how they have grown their empire. We are the newest and quietest species here. It was only a matter of time. She began walking again. Send a message to command. Tell them the Threxian fleet is coming. Tell them to prepare protocol silence. David's eyes widened slightly. Protocol silence? The full one? The full one, Elena Cho confirmed. Far across the galaxy, in a system most alien species had never even bothered to name, the third planet orbiting a yellow star called Sol was going about its business as it always did. On Earth, humans were living their lives, mostly unaware that a purple-skinned alien commander had just decided their fate in a council chamber they would never see. But 200,000 kilometers above the planet's surface, in the shadow of the moon, something was changing. Earth Defense Command was not a flashy organization. It did not hold parades. It did not release videos of its ships to impress anyone. In fact, most of what Earth Defense Command had built in the last 50 years was completely unknown to the rest of the galaxy, because humans had learned a very important lesson early in their history. The galaxy was full of predators, and predators went after whoever seemed the easiest meal. So humans had decided, as a species, to look like the easiest meal in the galaxy. They kept their ships in the shadows, on the far side of the moon, inside asteroid fields, tucked into the ice of outer planets. They sent only trade ships and diplomatic ships out into assembly space, small and unremarkable, while their real fleets stayed home, growing quietly stronger every year. This was not cowardice. It was strategy, born from a species that had spent its own history learning the hard way what happened when the loudest, most aggressive nations pushed too far, too fast, and paid for it with millions of lives. Humans remembered their own wars. They remembered how empires that boasted the loudest often fell the hardest, and when they finally met the wider galaxy and saw how the assembly worked, how species were ranked by how much noise they made, humanity made a quiet decision that most of the assembly never even noticed. They decided to be exactly what they seemed to be, weak, quiet, harmless. And underneath that mask they built. Admiral Marcus Webb stood on the bridge of the fleet carrier Patience, deep inside a hollowed-out asteroid in the outer edge of the Sol system. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 60s, with a face that had seen too many long nights and too much coffee. When the message from Elena Cho arrived, he read it twice, then set it down on his console, and looked out at the massive hangar bay stretching before him, filled with ships that no alien eye had ever seen. So they're finally coming, he said quietly to his second-in-command, a sharp-eyed woman named Captain Priya Nair. 12 cruisers and a carrier, according to the ambassador, Priya said. The Threxians. Big, loud, aggressive. Conquered 147 worlds by scaring them into surrender. Marcus allowed himself a small, tired smile. Let's see how scared we look. He pressed a button, and across the entire hidden fleet, a single order went out. It was short. It was simple. and every human crew member who received it understood exactly what it meant, because they had trained for this moment for years. Protocol silence, active. Not a single ship moved from where it hid. Not a single signal was sent that could be traced. The entire human fleet, larger and more advanced than any single force the Threxians had ever fought, simply went quiet and waited, patient as stone, for the enemy to walk into a trap they did not even know existed. 3 weeks later, the Threxian fleet crossed into human space without warning, without proper notice, exactly as David Okafor had predicted. 12 heavy cruisers, their purple hulls gleaming with weapons meant to intimidate, moved toward the third planet of the system called Sol, expecting to find a frightened, primitive people ready to beg for mercy. What they found instead was silence, not the silence of fear. The silence of a predator that had been quiet its entire life for a very good reason, and had just decided that the waiting was finally over. Korash Vey stood on the bridge of his command carrier, the dominant voice, watching the blue and green planet grow larger on the view screen. He felt nothing but confidence. This would be easy. This was always easy. He had no idea that somewhere in the darkness around his fleet, human sensor operators were already tracking every single one of his ships, calculating every weakness, and quietly, calmly, preparing a response that the Threxian Empire would remember for the rest of its history. The quiet ones were about to speak, and when they finally did, the whole galaxy would hear it. The Threxian fleet crossed the edge of the Sol system on a quiet Tuesday morning, though of course there was no morning in the cold dark of space. 12 heavy cruisers moved in a loose formation behind the command carrier dominant voice, their engines glowing a dull orange against the black. Sensors on every ship swept forward, searching for any sign of resistance. They found almost nothing, a handful of small satellites near Mars, a scattering of unarmed cargo ships moving between the outer planets, a single, old-looking space station near the asteroid belt that gave off weak power readings, as if it were barely functioning. To the Threxian sensor officers, it looked exactly like what they expected, a young, poor, primitive civilization, with barely any presence beyond its home planet. "This is almost disappointing," said Commander Vesa Thrun, Korash's second-in-command, as she studied the readouts. "Where is their defense fleet? Surely they have something." "They have nothing," Korash said, standing behind her with his arms crossed. "That is the point, Vesa. That is why they scored lowest in the entire assembly. A species without teeth does not need to be feared. It only needs to be told what to do." He turned to his communications officer. "Open a channel to the planet. Let us hear what these humans have to say for themselves." The channel opened, and after a short delay, a voice came through, calm and steady. It was Admiral Marcus Webb, speaking from a quiet room deep inside Earth's planetary command center, though the Threxians had no way of knowing that. To them, it sounded like it could have come from anywhere. "This is Earth Defense Command," Marcus said. "You are entering our system without the notice required by Assembly First Contact Protocol. Please state your intentions." Korash smiled his wide, sharp smile, the same one he had worn in the assembly chamber weeks earlier. "This is Fleet Commander Korash Vey, of the Threxian Empire. We are here for a routine inspection, as authorized by the Great Galactic Assembly. Your ambassador agreed to this. We expect full cooperation." There was a pause. Then Marcus's voice came back, unchanged, unbothered. "Understood. You may proceed to standard orbital distance around the third planet. Please be advised that Earth maintains planetary defense systems, and any aggressive action will be treated according to Assembly self-defense law." Vesa Thrun let out a short laugh. "Planetary defense systems. How quaint. Commander, our sensors show nothing resembling a real defense grid on that planet. A few old satellites, some ground-based radar. Nothing that could stop even one of our cruisers, let alone all 12. "Then let them believe what they wish to believe," Korash said. "We will proceed as planned. Bring the fleet into orbit, begin the inspection, and Vesa, have the Marines prepare for a ground demonstration. I want these humans to understand, very clearly, what happens to species who waste the Assembly's time with false modesty." What Korash Vey did not know, what none of the Threxians knew, was that Earth's old satellites and ground-based radar were exactly what they were designed to look like, Harmless, outdated, unimpressive. Behind that image, hidden in the radiation shadow of Jupiter, tucked inside hollowed asteroids throughout the belt, and buried deep beneath the ice of Europa, humanity's true defense fleet waited in complete silence, watching every move the Threxian ships made. Admiral Marcus Webb closed the communication channel and turned to Captain Priya Nair, who stood beside him studying a holographic display of the Threxian fleet's positions. "They're moving into orbit exactly like we predicted," Priya said. 12 cruisers, spreading into a standard blockade pattern around the planet. The carrier is holding back, about 200,000 kilometers out. Typical command structure. They lead with strength and keep their most valuable ship safe. "And the ground demonstration?" Marcus asked. "Their carrier just launched 6 troop transports, heading for the surface. Best guess, they're planning to land somewhere populated, probably a major city, and put on a show of force. Standard Threxian tactic before an occupation. Scare the locals into submission before anyone can organize resistance." Marcus nodded slowly. He had read the intelligence reports on the Threxian Empire many times. He knew their pattern by heart. Identify a species with a low presence score. Provoke a confrontation under the excuse of inspection. Send troops to the surface to intimidate the population. Wait for either surrender or a weak, disorganized resistance. Then move in and take whatever resources or territory they wanted, dressing it up afterward as voluntary annexation for the Assembly's records. It had worked 147 times. It would not work 148th time. "Let the transports land," Marcus said. "Let their Marines walk around. Let them feel like they're in control. We are not going to give them a reason to escalate to orbital bombardment before we're ready. Priya, contact ground command. Make sure every city on the list stays calm. No panic, no resistance, no crowds gathering. Everyone stays home, stays quiet, lets the Threxian Marines do their little parade." Priya raised an eyebrow. "You want us to just let them walk around?" "For now," Marcus said. "A predator that thinks it has already won stops watching for danger. Let Korash Vey have his moment. He is about to learn a very old human lesson. Which is..." Marcus allowed himself a small, grim smile. Never mistake someone's silence for weakness. Sometimes silence is just patience wearing a mask. On the surface of Earth, 6 Threxian troop transports descended through the atmosphere over the city of Nairobi, chosen by Korash's staff because their scans showed it as a large population center with minimal visible defenses. Purple-skinned Threxian Marines marched out of their landing craft in tight formation, their armored suits gleaming, their weapons held ready for a fight that never came. The streets were quiet, too quiet, though the Marines did not notice this at first. Store windows were shuttered. Homes were locked, but there was no panic, no screaming, no crowds running in fear, the way the Threxians had seen on 100 other worlds during first contact invasions. The humans of Nairobi had received the same order as every other city on the list. Stay calm, stay inside, let them look. A Threxian Marine captain named Doss Kellen walked down the center of an empty street, his weapon raised, waiting for someone to challenge him. No one did. He kicked open the door of a small shop and found it empty, the shelves still stocked with goods, as if the owner had simply locked up and walked away without hurry. "This is strange," Doss said over his comm channel to Vesa Thrun, who was monitoring the operation from orbit. "There's no chaos, no fighting. It's like they knew we were coming and just decided not to react." "Perhaps they are simply too frightened to resist," Vesa replied, though even she sounded slightly less certain than before. "Continue the demonstration. Move to the central government building. Raise our banner where it can be seen from orbit. Let the assembly see that the inspection is proceeding as planned." Doss did as ordered. The Threxian Marines marched through the empty streets of Nairobi and raised their empire's banner atop a tall government building, a purple flag with a golden claw at its center, visible from orbit exactly as planned. It was meant to be a symbol of dominance, a message to the whole assembly that another world had bowed before Threxian power. What none of the Marines noticed, marching through those quiet streets, was the small camera mounted discreetly on a nearby building, recording everything. Or the fact that every single move they made, every weapon they carried, every piece of armor they wore, was being studied in real time by human analysts hidden deep beneath the city, cataloging Threxian equipment and tactics with the same calm patience Earth had used to prepare for this moment for years. Back in orbit, HFY watched the reports come in from Nairobi with growing satisfaction. "You see, Vesa? Exactly as I predicted. No resistance, no defense. A frightened species that understands its place. The inspection teams have finished their scan of the planet's major cities," Vesa reported. "No significant weapons, no military bases, nothing resembling a real defense infrastructure. It appears the humans truly are as weak as their present score suggests." Korash leaned back in his command chair, satisfied. "Send the report to the assembly. Inform them that humanity has failed the inspection and is unable to demonstrate a credible self-defense capability. Recommend the planet be placed under Threxian protection status." This was, of course, the same trick the Threxian Empire had used 147 times before. Protection status was simply a polite word for occupation. Once approved by the assembly, the Threxians would be free to extract whatever resources they wished from Earth, in exchange for protecting the planet from threats that did not exist, except for the Threxians themselves. Vesa hesitated before sending the report. Something about the mission had felt strange to her from the start, though she could not name exactly what it was. The complete silence of the population, the way the humans on the comm channel had responded so calmly, without fear, without pleading. It did not match the pattern of a truly weak and frightened species. "Commander," she said slowly, "before we send the report, perhaps we should conduct a deeper scan. Something about this feels—" "You worry too much, Vesa," Korash interrupted. "I have conquered 147 worlds. I know what fear looks like, and I know what surrender looks like. This planet is neither fighting nor fleeing. It is simply accepting its fate, as it should. Send the report." Vesa sent the report, though the uneasy feeling did not leave her. 300,000 kilometers away, hidden in the shadow of a small, unremarkable asteroid that Threxian sensors had scanned and dismissed as empty rock, Admiral Marcus Webb watched the same footage from Nairobi that HFY had seen, though his reaction was very different. "They took the bait completely," Priya Nair said, studying the data streaming in from Earth's hidden sensor network. "Full troop deployment, full sensor sweep, and they're already drafting an annexation report for the assembly. They think we're finished." "Good," Marcus said. "Let them keep thinking that. How long until their carriers' shields are at their weakest recharge cycle?" Priya checked her display. "Threxian carrier-class shields cycle down for maintenance, roughly every 36 hours. Based on their arrival time, that window opens in approximately 11 hours. Marcus nodded slowly, watching the purple flag flying over Nairobi on his screen, a small symbol of an arrogance that was about to meet its match. "Then we wait 11 hours. Pass the word to every ship in the fleet. Protocol silence holds until my direct order. Nobody moves, nobody fires, not until I say the word." "And when you say the word?" Priya asked. Marcus's eyes did not leave the screen. Somewhere beneath that quiet, empty-looking asteroid belt, thousands of human ships sat in perfect, patient darkness, engines cold, weapons charged, crews calm and ready, waiting for a single order that had been 12 years in the making. "When I say the word," Marcus said quietly, "the Threxian Empire is going to learn why we call it protocol silence, because the last thing they will ever hear, right before we act, is nothing at all." 11 hours passed slowly for the crews of the hidden human fleet. In the dark hangars carved into asteroids, in the shadowed underside of moons, in bunkers buried deep beneath the ice of Europa, thousands of men and women sat at their stations, watching countdown clocks, checking systems they had already checked a dozen times, and waiting. Aboard the fleet carrier Patience, Admiral Marcus Webb walked the length of the command deck, stopping occasionally to speak quietly with his officers. He did not shout orders. He did not need to. Every person on that ship had trained for this exact moment for years, and every person understood exactly what was expected of them. "Status on the Threxian carrier's shields?" he asked, stopping beside a young sensor operator named Lieutenant Sarah Kim. "Cycling down now, sir," Sarah reported, just like Threxian maintenance patterns predicted. "Full shield strength should hit its lowest point in about 6 minutes." And their other ships? All 12 cruisers still holding standard blockade formation around the planet. No change in posture. They still believe the mission is a formality. Their scans show 0 detected threats in the system. Sarah paused, then added quietly, "They really don't know we're here, sir." "That's the idea," Marcus said. He continued down the deck until he reached Captain Priya Nair, who stood at the main tactical display, watching the 12 red icons representing Threxian cruisers surrounding the small blue icon that was Earth. Around them, faint and nearly invisible on the display, hundreds of green icons sat motionless in the dark, human ships waiting for the signal. "Once we move," Priya said, "there's no going back to being the quiet ones. Every species in the assembly will know what we really are." Marcus considered this for a long moment. "Maybe it's time they knew," he said. "We didn't build this fleet to stay hidden forever, Priya. We built it because we knew a day like this would come. A species that only pretends to be strong, invites war from anyone who doubts them. A species that pretends to be weak, invites war from anyone who believes them. We chose the second path because it bought us time. Time to grow, time to prepare. But the purpose was never to hide forever. It was to be ready for exactly this moment, and to make sure that when we finally showed our strength, we showed it decisively enough that no one would ever try this again." Priya nodded slowly. "So we don't just win this fight, we end the idea that we're an easy target, permanently." "Exactly," Marcus said. He turned back to the display, watching the countdown timer on the Threxian carrier's shields tick down toward 0. "Set a course intercept for every human ship in the fleet. Target the dominant voice first. If we take the head off this fleet quickly and cleanly, the rest of Korash's ships will be leaderless and confused before they even understand what's happening." "And the cruisers around Earth?" "Simultaneous strike," Marcus said. "The moment the carrier goes down, every cruiser gets hit at once from ships already in position around them. No warning shots, no demands for surrender first. We've given the Threxians every chance to act with honor, and they responded by invading our home without proper notice and putting on an intimidation display in one of our cities. This ends fast, and it ends with as few casualties on either side as we can manage, but it ends completely." Above the planet, aboard the dominant voice, Korash Vey was in an excellent mood. His officers had finished compiling the annexation report, and it was ready to be transmitted to the assembly the moment the fleet returned to Threxian territory. He imagined the reaction in the council chamber when the news arrived. Another world claimed, another example proving that the Threxian method of conquest through intimidation was as effective as ever. "Commander," Vesa Thrun said, approaching his chair with a datapad in hand, "our shields have completed their maintenance cycle rotation. We are at minimum protection for approximately 4 more minutes before full power returns." "As expected," Korash said, not even looking up. "There is nothing in this system capable of threatening us, Vesa. You worry too much. It is an admirable quality in an officer, but an unnecessary one on this mission." Vesa opened her mouth to respond, but she never got the chance. The first sign that something was wrong came not as an alarm, but as silence. Every sensor screen on the dominant voice's bridge, screens that had been calmly displaying empty space for 11 hours, suddenly filled with contacts. Not a few, not a dozen, hundreds of ships, appearing as if from nowhere, their engines igniting in perfect unison across the entire system. "Commander!" a sensor officer shouted, his voice cracking with disbelief. "Multiple contacts, all around us. They're everywhere." Ships emerging from the asteroid belt, from behind the moons, from... The bridge of the dominant voice erupted into chaos. Korash Vey stood up from his chair so fast it toppled backward, his 4 eyes wide as he stared at the tactical display, now filled with hundreds of green icons where moments ago there had been nothing but empty space. "That is impossible," he said, his booming voice suddenly small. "Our scans showed nothing. Nothing. Where did they come from?" "They were always there," Vesa said quietly, a terrible understanding dawning on her face. "We just never looked hard enough to see them." Before Korash could respond, the dominant voice shuddered violently. Weapons fire, precise and devastating, slammed into the carrier's weakened shields, which had not yet finished their maintenance cycle. Human ships, dozens of them, had appeared in perfect firing position around the massive vessel, striking not randomly but with terrible, practiced precision, targeting exactly the weapon systems and engine sections that Threxian ship designs were known to be vulnerable at. "Return fire," Korash shouted. "All weapons. Target anything that moves." But the Threxian gunners, trained for a career of easy victories against frightened, disorganized populations, found themselves suddenly fighting an enemy that did not panic, did not scatter, and did not give them a single easy shot. The human ships moved with a coordination that felt almost inhuman in its precision, striking and withdrawing in patterns that left almost no opening for Threxian weapons to find their mark. Around the planet, the same scene was playing out across all 12 Threxian cruisers. Ships that had spent 11 hours sitting in a leisurely blockade formation, confident in their total control of the system, suddenly found themselves surrounded and outmaneuvered by a force that had apparently been watching them the entire time, studying their formations, learning their weaknesses, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Aboard the cruiser Endless Glory, Captain Rethka Voss stared at her tactical display in horror as 3 human ships converged on her vessel's engine section with terrifying accuracy. "How do they know exactly where to hit us?" she demanded. "These are supposed to be primitive ships. Where did this technology come from?" Her weapons officer, sweating and frantic, could only shake his head. "I don't know, Captain. Our own intelligence reports said this species had nothing. No fleet, no advanced technology. This isn't possible." But it was possible, because Earth Defense Command had spent 12 years doing exactly what the young officer's intelligence reports had failed to account for: watching, learning, and preparing, all while presenting a mask of harmless weakness to a galaxy that judged worth by noise and never bothered to look closer at a species that made none. On the bridge of the Patience, Admiral Marcus Webb watched the battle unfold across his tactical display with the same calm, steady expression he had worn throughout the entire crisis. Around him, his officers worked with quiet efficiency, calling out ship positions, adjusting formations, coordinating strikes across hundreds of vessels, with a precision that came from years of preparation for this single moment. "Threxian carriers' shields just failed completely," Sarah Kim reported. "Multiple hull breaches. Their engines are offline. They're dead in space, sir." "And the cruisers?" "6 disabled, engines and weapons knocked out. 4 more taking heavy damage and beginning to retreat toward the system edge. The remaining 2 are attempting a coordinated counterattack against our forward squadron. But..." Sarah paused, checking her display again. "It's not working, sir. Our ships are handling it." Marcus allowed himself a small nod. "Cease fire on any ship that stops resisting. We are not here to destroy them. We are here to make sure they never make this mistake again, and that every species watching learns the same lesson. Open a channel to the dominant voice." A moment later, the channel connected, and Marcus's voice carried across to the broken, drifting Threxian command carrier, where Korash Vey stood amid sparking consoles and emergency lighting, his confidence shattered along with half his fleet. "Commander Korash Vey," Marcus said, his tone calm, almost gentle, which somehow made it more unsettling than if he had shouted. "This is Admiral Marcus Webb of Earth Defense Command. Your fleet has violated Assembly First Contact Protocol by entering our system without proper notice, and you conducted an unauthorized show of force against a civilian population. Under Assembly self-defense law, we were within our rights to respond as we have. I am now offering you the chance to withdraw your surviving ships. Refuse, and we will finish what you started." Korash stared at the comm screen, his 4 eyes wide with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "This is not possible," he said, his voice no longer booming, but tight and strained. "You are the quiet ones, the weakest species in the Assembly. Your present score was never a measure of our strength," Marcus interrupted, still calm. "Only of our silence. You mistook one for the other. That mistake has cost you 6 ships and, I imagine, quite a lot of pride. I suggest you not make it again." For a long moment, Korash said nothing at all, staring at the screen as if trying to make sense of a universe that had suddenly stopped making sense. Behind him, on the shattered bridge of the dominant voice, Vesa Thrun watched her commander's face and understood, with a cold certainty, that everything the Threxian Empire believed about the galaxy's weakest species had just been proven catastrophically wrong. And far across the assembly, on distant worlds and orbiting stations, sensors and observers from a dozen other species had already begun picking up the strange, sudden battle happening in a system that belonged to a species everyone had dismissed as harmless. The quiet ones were quiet no longer, and the whole galaxy was about to start paying very close attention. News of the battle in the Sol system spread through the galaxy faster than anyone expected. It began quietly, as most things involving humanity seem to, with a handful of automated observation stations near the edge of assembly space, recording strange energy readings and unexplained ship movements. Within 2 days, those readings had been shared, analyzed, and argued over by dozens of species, and within a week, the entire assembly was talking about almost nothing else. At Verun's crown, the great assembly chamber was louder than it had been in years. Delegates from every corner of known space crowded the halls, trading rumors and half-confirmed reports. The Threxian Empire had suffered its first major defeat in over a century, and it had suffered that defeat at the hands of the species with the lowest presence score in assembly history. Ambassador Elena Cho sat in her usual seat at the back of the chamber, calm as always, while species after species turned to stare at her, whispering among themselves. The Yulin delegate who had once asked why humanity did not respond to Korash's insults now leaned toward her again, his small eyes wide with something between fear and awe. "Is it true?" he asked quietly. "6 Threxian ships disabled, their fleet commander humiliated, and your people did this without losing a single vessel?" "I believe the reports are accurate," Elena said simply. "But how? Your present score is the lowest of any member species. You have shown the assembly almost nothing in 12 years. How does a species with nothing show up and defeat one of the most powerful militaries in known space?" Elena considered the question for a moment before answering. "Perhaps," she said, "the present score was never measuring what everyone believed it was measuring. It measures noise. It has never measured strength. We simply chose not to make noise until we had a reason to." Before the Yulin delegate could respond, the chamber fell into a tense hush as the doors opened and a Threxian delegation entered, led not by Korash Vey, who remained aboard his damaged carrier undergoing repairs, but by a senior diplomat named Ambassador Threl Cass. The Threxian ambassador's usually proud posture was noticeably stiffer than before, his 4 eyes darting nervously around the chamber as he made his way to the podium. "Delegates of the assembly," Threl Cass began, his voice lacking the booming confidence Threxians were known for. "The Threxian Empire wishes to formally address the incident that occurred in the Sol system 8 days ago." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Every eye turned to the podium. "Our 3rd Fleet, under the command of Fleet Commander Korash Vey, entered human space, under the authority granted by this assembly for a routine inspection. During this operation, a serious misunderstanding occurred, resulting in an armed confrontation with human defense forces. The Threxian Empire regrets any escalation that may have taken place, and wishes to state, for the record, that our intentions were purely diplomatic in nature." This was, of course, a complete rewriting of events, and everyone in the chamber knew it, but the Threxian ambassador's carefully worded statement was interrupted before he could finish, as the chamber doors opened again, and Elena Cho rose from her seat. "Ambassador Cass," she said calmly, walking toward the podium. "With respect, I believe the assembly deserves a more accurate account of what occurred." Threl Cass's eyes narrowed slightly, but he stepped aside, unwilling to openly refuse a fellow ambassador the floor in front of the entire assembly. Elena Cho stood at the podium, facing the largest crowd of delegates humanity had ever addressed. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. 8 days ago, she began, a Threxian fleet of 12 heavy cruisers and 1 command carrier entered the Sol system without providing the notice required under Assembly First Contact Protocol, which this Assembly's own charter clearly outlines in Article 12. Upon arrival, rather than conducting the routine inspection that had been authorized, Threxian forces deployed troop transports to the surface of Earth and staged an armed demonstration in a major population center, deploying Marines with weapons drawn through civilian streets. She paused, letting the words settle across the chamber. Earth Defense Command allowed this to occur without incident, choosing restraint over confrontation, even as an armed foreign military marched through one of our cities uninvited. It was only when the Threxian fleet, having completed an unauthorized ground operation, prepared to submit a report recommending forced protection status, a term this assembly well understands to mean occupation, that Earth Defense Command exercised its right to self-defense under assembly law, disabling the aggressive fleet with minimal use of force and zero loss of life on either side. The chamber had gone completely silent, every delegate listening intently. I would remind this assembly, Elena continued, that the Threxian Empire has used this exact pattern 147 times before against other member species, always beginning with an unauthorized inspection, always followed by an intimidation display, always ending in a recommendation for protection status that conveniently allows the Threxian Empire to extract resources and territory from a weaker world. Humanity was simply the first species with the capability to say no. A murmur swept through the chamber, and this time it was not directed at humanity. Dozens of delegates were turning now to look at the Threxian ambassador, their expressions shifting from curiosity to something colder. Several species in that chamber had experienced exactly what Elena Cho was describing, and they had simply lacked the strength to resist it. A Doff delegate, one of the ancient philosopher species, rose slowly from his seat. "Ambassador Cho," he said in his slow, measured voice, "are you suggesting that the Threxian Empire's territorial growth over the past century has been built upon this same pattern of provocation and coerced annexation?" "I am not suggesting it," Elena replied. "I am stating it as documented fact, and I would invite any species in this chamber who has experienced a Threxian inspection, followed by a recommendation for protection status, to share their own account. I suspect humanity is not the only quiet species in this assembly that has simply never had the strength to speak up before now." The chamber erupted into overlapping conversation, delegates turning to each other, some standing, some already moving toward the recording stations to submit formal testimony. Ambassador Threll Cass stood frozen at the edge of the podium, watching a century of careful diplomatic construction begin to crumble in real time. Elena Cho did not gloat. She did not raise her voice or claim victory. She simply returned to her seat, calm as she had been throughout, and let the assembly do what assemblies did best: talk, argue, and slowly, painfully, arrive at the truth. Far above the planet Earth, aboard the damaged carrier Dominant Voice, Korash Vey sat alone in his private quarters, staring at a data pad showing the growing list of formal complaints being filed against the Threxian Empire by species across the galaxy. Vesa Thrun entered quietly, carrying a fresh damage report from the ship's engineering teams. "Repairs are progressing," she said. "We should be capable of limited jump travel within 3 days, long enough to return to Threxian space for full repairs." Korash did not look up from the data pad. "Do you know what the worst part of this is, Vesa? Losing 6 ships?" "No," Korash said quietly. "The worst part is that I was right about one thing. Humanity really was hiding something. I simply assumed that because they made no noise, there was nothing there to find. I have spent my entire career reading a species' worth by how loudly they announce themselves to the galaxy. It never once occurred to me that the quietest species I had ever encountered might simply be the one that understood, better than anyone, exactly when silence was a weapon, and when it was time to stop being silent." Vesa said nothing, because there was nothing comforting to say. She had felt the same uneasy suspicion herself, back before the battle began, and she had let her commander's confidence overrule her own instincts. It was a lesson she would not forget. "What happens now?" she asked instead. Korash finally looked up, his 4 eyes tired in a way Vesa had never seen before. "Now, the Assembly investigates every conquest this empire has ever claimed, and I suspect they will find that humanity's account of our methods was far more accurate than our own official records. Now, other species who have quietly suffered under our expansion for a century begin to find their courage, because they have just watched proof that a supposedly weak species can defeat us when it finally chooses to fight back. And now, Vesa, humanity becomes the single most watched, most discussed, most feared species in this entire assembly, precisely because they spent 12 years making everyone believe the opposite was true." He set down the datapad and looked out the viewport at the distant blue and green planet still visible in the ship's damaged sensors, growing smaller as the dominant voice began its slow, limping journey home. "We challenged the quietest species in the galaxy," Korash said softly, almost to himself, "and I fear we have only just begun to learn what that silence was hiding." In the weeks that followed the battle in the Sol system, the Great Galactic Assembly changed in ways that no one, human or otherwise, could have fully predicted. Elena Cho's testimony had opened a door that could not be closed again. One by one, delegates from small, quiet species began coming forward with their own stories. Worlds that had received unexpected Threxian inspections, populations that had endured armed demonstrations in their streets, governments that had been quietly pressured into accepting protection status because they lacked the strength to refuse. The Assembly convened a formal investigation, the largest in its history. Threxian diplomatic staff worked frantically behind the scenes to control the damage, but the truth had already spread too far to contain. Within 2 months, the Assembly voted to strip the Threxian Empire of its authority to conduct unilateral inspections of any member species, a power they had used and abused for over a century. It was not a total collapse of Threxian influence, but it was the first real check placed on their expansion in living memory, and every delegate in that chamber knew exactly which species had made it possible. Back on Earth, life had mostly returned to normal, at least on the surface. The people of Nairobi, who had spent one strange day watching purple-skinned aliens march through their empty streets, went back to their homes, their shops, their ordinary lives. Most of them would never fully understand how close their planet had come to a very different fate, or how much quiet preparation had gone into keeping them safe. Aboard the fleet carrier Patience, still stationed in its hidden position among the asteroids, Admiral Marcus Webb reviewed the final reports from the Assembly investigation, with Captain Priya Nair standing beside him. "The Assembly stripped the Threxians of unilateral inspection rights," Priya said, reading from her datapad. "6 other species have filed formal grievances since our testimony went public. 2 of them are requesting military advisement from Earth Defense Command directly." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "They want our help? They want to know how a species with the lowest presence score in Assembly history built a fleet capable of disabling 6 Threxian cruisers without losing a single ship," Priya said. "Word's gotten around, Admiral. Everyone wants to know the secret." Marcus was quiet for a moment, thinking. "There isn't really a secret," he said finally. "Just patience, and the willingness to prepare quietly instead of boasting loudly. Most species in this Assembly measure strength by how much attention they can draw to themselves. We measured it differently. We built our strength in the dark, where no one could see it, and no one could plan around it. It's not a strategy that works for everyone, but it worked for us, because it fit who we already were." Priya considered this. "Do you think we go back to being quiet now? Or does this change everything?" Marcus looked out at the massive hangar bay stretching before him, filled with the same hidden fleet that had waited patiently for 12 years, before finally being called into action. "I think," he said slowly, "we go back to being exactly who we were before. Quiet, when quiet serves us. Loud, when the moment calls for it. The mistake the Threxians made was assuming those 2 things could never belong to the same species. We know better." Back at Varen's Crown, the Assembly chamber looked different than it had months earlier. Where humanity's small delegation had once sat unnoticed at the back of the room, they now found themselves the center of constant attention. Delegates who had never bothered to speak to Elena Cho before now sought her out for private meetings, trade proposals, and requests for alliance. The Yulin delegate who had once asked Elena why she did not respond to Korash's insults approached her again one afternoon, this time with a very different question. "Ambassador Cho," he said, "the Assembly is preparing to recalculate the present score formula. There is discussion of removing it entirely, given what your species has proven about its flaws. I wondered, now that everyone knows the truth about humanity's strength, will you continue to describe yourselves as quiet, or has that time passed?" Elena Cho considered the question carefully before answering, the same way she considered most things. "I think," she said, "that being quiet was never really about hiding what we are. It was about choosing when to be seen, We are still the same species we were before this happened. We still prefer patience to noise, preparation to boasting, and careful action to loud threats. The only thing that has changed is that the galaxy finally understands what that patience was protecting. And if another species tries what the Threxians tried, the Yulin delegate asked, if someone else decides to test the quiet ones again? Elena smiled, a small, calm smile that had grown slightly more confident in the months since Korash Vay's fleet had limped home in defeat. Then I suppose they will learn the same lesson the Threxians learned. Some things are worth staying quiet about, right up until the moment they are not. Far across the galaxy, aboard a repaired but scarred Threxian command carrier, now stationed permanently within Threxian territory, Korash Vay stood before a different kind of audience, a tribunal of his own empire's senior military council, gathered to review the failure of the Third Fleet's mission to Sol. He had told the truth of what happened, every detail, holding nothing back, because he had learned that hiding failure only made it more dangerous later. "You are telling us," said Grand Marshal Ostrek Val, the most senior officer in the Threxian military, "that a species with the lowest present score in assembly history disabled 6 of our cruisers and forced the surrender of our command carrier, using technology and tactics our own intelligence services knew nothing about?" "Yes, Grand Marshal," Korash said. There was no boasting left in his voice, none of the confidence he had carried into the assembly chamber months earlier. "They allowed us to believe exactly what we wanted to believe. They let us walk into their home, parade through their cities, and prepare our reports of easy conquest, all while a fleet larger than anything we have ever fielded waited in complete silence, watching us, learning us, until the moment they chose to act." Grand Marshal Val was silent for a long moment. "And what would you recommend, Fleet Commander, should the Empire ever consider approaching this species again?" Korash thought carefully before answering. He thought of Elena Cho's calm voice in the assembly chamber. He thought of Admiral Webb's steady tone over the comm channel, offering him the chance to withdraw rather than gloating over his defeat. He thought of the strange, unsettling silence of Nairobi's empty streets, a silence that had not been fear, but patience. "I would recommend, Grand Marshal," Korash said finally, "that we never mistake their silence for weakness again. And I would recommend that we hope very seriously that we never give them another reason to break it." The tribunal ended without further questions. Months later, when the Great Galactic Assembly finally voted to abolish the old present score system entirely, replacing it with a new measure that accounted for a species' actual demonstrated capability rather than simply how loudly they announced themselves, many delegates credited the change to a single event: the day a fleet of Threxian warships had entered a quiet, unremarkable system expecting an easy conquest, and instead found the true face of a species that had spent 12 careful years preparing for exactly this moment. Humanity did not celebrate the victory with parades or monuments. There were no grand speeches broadcast across assembly space, no boastful announcements of humanity's newfound respect among the stars. Earth Defense Command quietly returned its fleet to the shadows of the asteroid belt, ready but unseen, exactly as it had always been. And across the galaxy, species that had once dismissed the quiet ones as harmless began to look a little more closely at the small, unremarkable ships humanity still sent out into assembly space. They began to wonder what else might be waiting quietly in the dark, patient and prepared, behind a mask of gentle, unassuming silence. They had learned, at great cost to the Threxian Empire, a lesson that would echo through assembly history for generations to come. In a galaxy that measured worth by noise, the most dangerous species of all might simply be the one that had chosen, quite deliberately, to never make a sound until the moment truly demanded it. Humanity had not shouted its strength to the stars. It had waited, and watched, and prepared in silence. And when the silence finally broke, the whole galaxy listened.